They compelled the rancher to marry the old maid. What she did next shook the whole county. The county had always been proud of its rancher. People spoke his name with respect, the kind that came from years of hard work and quiet strength. He owned one of the largest ranches in the area, land passed down through generations. His days began before sunrise and ended long after dark. He was known to be fair in business, firm in his decisions, and distant in his personal life. He did not talk much, did not laugh easily, and never explained himself to anyone. In a place where everyone knew everyone, he remained a man slightly apart. What the county talked about most, though, was not his land or his cattle. It was the fact that he was still unmarried. In this county, that mattered. A man of his age and standing was expected to have a wife, children, and a home full of life. People believed marriage kept a man balanced and respectable. An unmarried rancher was seen as unfinished business. Whispers followed him at church, at town meetings, and even at the market. Some said he was too proud, others said something must be wrong with him. He ignored all of it and kept working. On the other side of town lived the woman people cruelly called the Old Maid. She had grown up in the same county, walking the same dusty roads, attending the same small school. Life had not been easy for her. After her parents passed away, she stayed behind to care for younger relatives, then worked where she could to survive. Years went by quietly. Suitors never came, or if they did not stay. The town noticed her age more than her kindness, her silence more than her strength. By the time she lived alone in a small house near the edge of town, the label had already been placed on her. People spoke about her as if she could not hear. They said she was strange because she kept to herself. They said she must be bitter because she never married. No one asked her what she wanted. No one wondered what she had endured. To the county, she was a problem that had no solution. Until one day, the county decided to create one. It started with a meeting among the few influential people, landowners, elders, and local officials who believed they knew what was best for everyone. The rancher's land had become important to the county's future. There were talks of road expansion, shared grazing rights, and political deals that required stability. An unmarried man with no clear heir made people nervous. They wanted certainty, control, and appearances. Someone suggested marriage. At first, it sounded foolish. The rancher had refused every match before. But then someone mentioned the woman. She had no powerful family, no voice in town politics, and no one to defend her. A marriage between the two would solve several problems at once. The rancher would appear settled. The woman would no longer be the county's embarrassment, and the elders would feel they had restored order. The idea spread quickly, dressed up as concern and tradition. Soon it reached the rancher. He listened without interrupting as they spoke of duty, legacy, and reputation. They reminded him of favors owed, of permits delayed, of problems that could easily become worse. They did not threaten him openly, but the message was clear. Refuse, and life would become difficult. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice. He only asked for time. That night, he walked the length of his land, thinking. The ranch was his life. Every fence post, every animal, every acre carried memories of struggle and survival. He had built it through droughts, losses, and loneliness. The thought of losing control over it was unbearable. Marriage to him had always seemed like a distraction, but now it was being used as a tool. Across town, the woman heard the news in a far different way. It reached her through whispers at the market and sideways glances from neighbors. No one came to ask her opinion. No one explained why her life was suddenly a topic of discussion. When someone finally told her directly, it was framed as an opportunity, almost a gift, a respected rancher, a secure home, a chance to finally belong. She listened quietly, her face calm, her hands steady. Inside, her thoughts raced. She understood what this truly was. She was being offered not love, but convenience. Not choice, but direction. Still, refusing was not simple. In this county, a woman without support could be pushed aside easily. Saying no would make her an enemy to people who already looked down on her. That night, she sat alone in her small house, thinking about all the years she had survived without help. She thought of the way people spoke about her as if she were invisible. She knew this marriage was not kindness. It was pressure, wrapped in polite words. Days passed, and the county watched closely. When the rancher finally gave his answer, it was brief. He agreed. The decision sent waves through the town. Some felt satisfied, believing they had done something good. Others were curious, eager to see how the woman would fail in a world they believed was too hard for her. Very few felt any guilt. The woman was informed that the wedding would happen soon. There would be no long engagement, no time for doubt. She accepted the news with a quiet nod. People mistook her calm for weakness. They did not see the careful way she listened, or the way her eyes studied everything around her. She met the rancher only once before the wedding. The meeting was polite and distant. No promises were made, no comfort was offered. Both understood this was an arrangement forced by others. They parted without emotion, each carrying their own private thoughts. As the wedding plans moved forward, the county felt pleased with itself. Order was being restored. Stories were already forming about how the rancher would tame the old maid, how she would struggle with ranch life, how this marriage would quietly fail without causing trouble. None of them imagined that this decision, made so casually, would change everything. Because while the county saw a quiet woman with no power, they failed to see her patience, her sharp mind, and her memory for details. They failed to notice that years of being overlooked had taught her how to observe without being seen. They did not understand that being pushed into a corner does not always break a person. Sometimes it prepares them. And as the wedding date drew closer, the woman began to plan, not out of anger, but out of resolve. If she was going to be forced into a life she did not choose, she would not live it as the person the county believed her to be. The county thought it had solved a problem. The wedding day arrived without joy. It was planned quickly, almost carelessly, as if the county wanted to finish the matter before anyone could think too deeply about it. The church was filled not with warmth, but with curiosity. People came to watch, not to celebrate. They wanted to see the faces of the man and the woman who had been pushed into this decision. The rancher stood at the front, calm and unreadable. He wore a clean suit, but it did not soften him. His eyes stayed forward, his posture stiff. This was not the day he had imagined for himself, but he had learned long ago how to accept things without complaint. The woman walked down the aisle slowly. Her dress was simple, chosen for practicality rather than beauty. There were no tears in her eyes, no smile on her lips. She looked steady, almost distant. Some in the crowd whispered that she should be grateful. Others shook their heads, already judging her. The vows were spoken. The words sounded heavy in the quiet room. Promises were made because they were required, not because they were felt. When it was over, there was polite applause, followed by soft chatter. No one lingered long. The county had gotten what it wanted. Now it wanted to move on. That same evening, the woman arrived at the ranch house. It was large, built with strong wood and thick walls, shaped by years of use rather than comfort. The air smelled of dust and leather. Everything had a place, and nothing seemed welcoming. The rancher showed her to a room at the far end of the house. It was clean, but plain.
He told her she could change anything she wished.
His voice was respectful, but distant. They ate dinner in silence that night. He spoke briefly about ranch routines. She listened carefully, asking only a few simple questions. When the meal ended, he returned to his work, and she went to her room. That was how their marriage began. Days passed in a quiet pattern. The rancher rose early, worked long hours, and returned tired. He treated her politely, but like a guest who might leave at any time. There was no unkindness in him, but no warmth either. He assumed she would find ranch life too hard and grow frustrated. He expected complaints. None came. Instead, she watched how the house was run, how supplies were stored, how money was spent without much thought. She noticed how workers came and went, how tasks were repeated without improvement. She listened when people spoke, remembering small details they thought no one cared about. She kept her opinions to herself. The townspeople waited for signs of failure. They expected her to struggle with early mornings and physical labor. They expected her to embarrass herself or anger her husband. When none of that happened, they became confused. Some claimed she was lazy because she stayed quiet. Others said she was trying too hard to please him. The truth was simpler. She was learning. She began by helping with small things. She organized storage rooms, kept records of supplies, and made sure nothing was wasted. She repaired what could be fixed instead of replaced. These were things she had learned long ago, surviving with little. No one had ever praised her for such skills before, but she had never needed praise to do what was necessary. Slowly, the ranch began to feel different. The rancher noticed changes before he noticed her. Supplies lasted longer. Expenses dropped. Workers seemed more organized. He assumed it was luck or coincidence. Only later did he realize she was behind it. One evening, he asked her a question about the household accounts. She answered calmly, explaining what she had adjusted and why. Her explanation was clear and sensible. He listened, surprised by how much thought she had put into it. He thanked her. It was the first time he had done so. She nodded and returned to her work. As weeks turned into months, the county watched closely. People visited the ranch pretending to check on business while truly looking for cracks in the marriage. They found none. The woman remained quiet, respectful, and firm when needed. She did not seek attention, but she did not hide either. Some people grew uncomfortable. They had expected her to fail, not to settle in. They had expected the rancher to dominate the household, not to slowly rely on her judgment. Rumors began to spread. They said she was trying to control him. They said she was using kindness to gain power. None of them considered that she might simply be capable. The rancher heard the rumors and ignored them. He was not a man easily swayed by gossip. What mattered to him was results. And the results were clear. The ranch was running smoother than it had in years. Still, the space between them remained. They slept in separate rooms. They spoke mainly about work. There were no shared memories, no laughter, no arguments. It was a partnership in name only. Both were careful, uncertain how far to step. One night, a problem arose with a supplier who had been overcharging the ranch for years. The rancher was frustrated but unsure how to handle it without causing trouble. The woman asked to see the records. She studied them quietly, then pointed out patterns he had missed. The next day, the issue was resolved without conflict. That was the moment he truly looked at her. Not as the woman the county had forced upon him, but as someone standing beside him. Someone steady, someone sharp. He felt something unfamiliar, respect mixed with regret. He realized how little he knew about her, and how unfair his assumptions had been. She noticed the change but said nothing. Meanwhile, the county's interest turned into concern.
The marriage had not weakened the rancher. It had strengthened him.
The woman they thought would be silent and small was quietly becoming a presence. Invitations stopped coming. Conversations ended when she entered a room. People smiled politely, but watched carefully. She understood exactly what was happening. She had lived her whole life under watchful eyes. This was nothing new. Instead of retreating, she began attending town matters with her husband. She did not speak often, but when she did, her words were measured and thoughtful. People found it hard to dismiss her without appearing foolish. That irritated them more than anger ever could. The rancher noticed how the county reacted to her and felt a growing sense of responsibility. He had agreed to this marriage for practical reasons, but now he saw the cost she was paying. He began standing beside her more clearly, not out of duty, but fairness. Their marriage remained quiet, but it was no longer empty. At night, she sometimes sat alone, thinking about how her life had changed so suddenly. She had not chosen this path, but she had chosen how to walk it. She knew the county was waiting for her to slip, to make a mistake they could use against her. She did not intend to give them one. What the county did not realize was that silence can be a strategy, that patience can be preparation, and that a woman who has survived being ignored learns how to move carefully and effectively through spaces where others are careless. By the end of those first months, it was clear to anyone paying attention that this marriage was not what they had expected. It was becoming something else entirely. The change did not happen all at once. It came quietly, almost unnoticed at first, like grass growing after rain. The woman continued her daily routine without drawing attention to herself, but the effects of her work began to show more clearly with each passing week. The ranch was running better than it ever had. Workers arrived on time and knew exactly what was expected of them. Tasks were planned instead of rushed. Supplies were ordered only when needed, and nothing went missing anymore. Even the animals looked healthier. Small problems were solved before they became large ones. It was not magic, and it was not luck. It was careful thinking, patience, and consistency. The rancher watched all of this with growing surprise. He had spent his whole life believing that hard work alone was enough. Work longer hours, push harder, and problems would eventually break. That was how he had survived for years. But now he was seeing something different. The woman did not rush. She did not force. She observed, planned, and acted only when she was sure. One afternoon, a neighboring rancher stopped by unexpectedly. He looked around, impressed, and commented on how organized everything seemed. The rancher accepted the compliment, but felt uneasy. He knew the truth. This improvement was not his doing alone. That evening, he finally asked her how she had learned to manage things so well. She did not hesitate. He told him about her past in simple words, about managing a household with very little money, about caring for others before herself, about learning to plan ahead because mistakes were costly when there was no one to help. She did not speak with bitterness. She spoke with honesty. He listened carefully. For the first time, he saw her not as a quiet figure moving through his house, but as a person shaped by experience. He felt ashamed of how little he had tried to understand her before. From that point on, he began to include her in decisions. Not as a favor, but because her advice worked. When a disagreement arose between two workers, she suggested a solution that satisfied both sides. When weather threatened the harvest, she proposed adjustments that reduced losses. Each time, the results spoke for themselves. The rancher started trusting her judgment fully. The county noticed. People began to talk, not with mockery this time, but with suspicion. They said she was changing things too much. They said she was influencing her husband. Some claimed she was clever in a dangerous way. The same qualities they now admired privately were the ones they feared publicly. The woman was aware of every whisper. She heard the pauses in conversation when she entered her room. She saw the forced smiles and the careful words, but she did not react. She had learned long ago that responding to every comment only gave others power. Instead, she stayed focused. She began attending more community gatherings with the rancher. At first, she sat quietly listening. People underestimated her silence, assuming she had nothing to add. That assumption was their mistake. When she spoke clearly. She asked practical questions. She pointed out small issues others ignored. She offered solutions without demanding agreement. Slowly, people began to look at her differently. Not everyone liked her, but they could no longer dismiss her. One evening, during a discussion about shared resources, a local leader tried to interrupt her. She calmly continued speaking, her voice steady. When she finished, the room was silent. Even those who disagreed could not deny that she made sense. The rancher watched her with a mix of pride and disbelief. This was the woman the county had called useless. This was the woman they had pushed into marriage to solve their own problems. And now she was standing among them, unshaken. Back at the ranch, their relationship shifted again. They still kept their distance, but the space between them felt different. They spoke more easily now. Sometimes they shared meals longer than necessary. Occasionally, there was a small smile, a brief laugh. Nothing dramatic, but something real. The rancher found himself asking her opinion, not just about work, but about people. He began trusting her instincts. She had a way of seeing through false intentions without being harsh. That skill, he realized, came from years of being judged unfairly. One day, she discovered inconsistencies in the county's shared accounts while reviewing routine documents. At first, she thought it might be an error, but the numbers did not add up. She checked again and again.
She did not accuse anyone. She quietly gathered information, comparing records, noting patterns.
She kept everything organized, careful not to draw attention. She knew that speaking too soon could backfire. When she finally showed the rancher what she had found, he was stunned. He had trusted those records for years. The idea that something was wrong disturbed him deeply. He asked her if she was sure. She nodded and showed him her notes. Everything was clear. Logical, undeniable. He felt anger rise, but she stopped him. Not yet, she said calmly. We need to understand everything first. That moment changed how he saw her forever. She was thinking long term. She was protecting not just their ranch, but the truth. He realized then how dangerous it was to underestimate someone like her. The county, unaware of what she was discovering, continued to talk. Some said the rancher had grown weak under her influence. Others said she was planning something. There were jokes, half-serious warnings, and quiet resentment. No one imagined how close they were to the truth. The woman continued her work as usual, never letting on that she knew more than she showed. At night, she sometimes lay awake, thinking about how far she had come. She had entered this marriage with no power, no voice, and no choice. Now she held knowledge that could change things. The weight of that responsibility sat heavily on her, but she did not fear it. She had spent her life being careful. This was no different. The rancher, too, found himself reflecting. He thought about the day he had agreed to the marriage, believing it was a sacrifice he had to make. Now he understood that the sacrifice had not been hers alone. The county had forced them both into something they did not choose. But where he had expected loss, he had gained an ally. And the county had gained an opponent it never saw coming. By the end of that season, it was clear that the woman was no longer invisible. She was not loud. She did not demand attention, but her presence was felt everywhere. In the smooth running of the ranch, in the careful questions at meetings, in the unease of those who preferred things hidden. The label the county had given her no longer fit, and that frightened them more than they were willing to admit. Because when a person rises quietly, without asking permission, there is no easy way to stop them. The shift in the county's mood was slow but clear. What had once been curiosity turned into discomfort, and discomfort soon grew into quiet resistance. People no longer spoke freely around the woman. Doors closed more quickly. Meetings ended earlier than usual. Smiles felt forced, and kindness felt measured. For years, certain people had grown used to things being done a certain way. Decisions were made by a few, records were trusted without question, and no one looked too closely. The system worked because most people believed it did. Now, that belief was beginning to crack. And at the center of that change stood a woman who had once been ignored. She did not announce her discoveries. She did not accuse anyone publicly, Instead, she continued observing, listening, and collecting information. Every document she touched, every conversation she overheard added to a growing picture. She worked carefully, knowing that truth without preparation could be twisted. The rancher noticed the pressure before she mentioned it. Old friends became distant. Business partners hesitated. Permits that once moved quickly were suddenly delayed. Small obstacles appeared where none had existed before. He understood the message clearly. The county was unhappy, and it was pushing back. One evening, he asked her if she felt it too. She nodded. She had felt it for weeks. "They are afraid," she said quietly. "Not of us. Of what they might lose." He wanted to confront them, to demand fairness. But she stopped him again, gently this time. She reminded him that power rarely reacts well to force. It reacts to exposure. So they waited. The woman continued to attend meetings, now speaking less than before. She allowed others to feel comfortable again, to believe they were still in control. Meanwhile, she refined her records, checked her facts, and prepared herself. The county elders met privately more often now. They spoke of the woman with irritation. They questioned her intentions. They suggested that she was stepping outside her place. Some even hinted that the rancher should remind her where she belonged. When those words reached him, something hardened inside him. He had entered the marriage out of pressure. He had stayed distant out of habit. But now, he saw clearly how unfair it all was. The county had used both of them, and now it was trying to protect itself by pushing her back into silence. He refused. At the next public gathering, when subtle comments were made about tradition and order, he spoke calmly but firmly. He made it clear that his wife spoke with his full support. The room fell quiet. That was not the response they had expected. The woman felt the change immediately. The looks grew colder. Invitations stopped entirely. A few people began spreading stories about her past, twisting ordinary moments into suspicious ones. They questioned her motives, her background, her character. None of it was openly hostile, but it was meant to isolate her. She did not respond. Instead, she finished preparing what she had been working toward. When the time came, she chose her moment carefully. It was a county-wide meeting, one that everyone important attended. The agenda was routine. The mood was confident. No one expected disruption. The woman sat quietly beside her husband, listening as she always did. Then, when a familiar issue arose, shared funds, land use, and responsibility, she stood. The room shifted. People exchanged looks. Some frowned. Others smiled politely, already tired of her presence. She asked a question about records. A simple one, then another. She referenced dates, figures, and agreements. She did not accuse. She did not raise her voice. She simply asked for clarity. The answers came slowly at first. Then, with uncertainty, she continued, laying out the information she had gathered. She showed patterns. She showed inconsistencies. She showed how decisions made behind closed doors had affected everyone else. Her words were clear, her tone respectful. The silence in the room grew heavy. Some tried to interrupt her. She paused, waited, and continued. Others shifted uncomfortably, realizing too late that this was not a discussion they could control. Every point she made was supported by evidence. There was no room for denial. When she finished, no one spoke. The rancher stood beside her, steady and unmoving. The county's balance broke in that moment. People began asking questions, real ones this time. The elders who had once spoken confidently now struggled to respond. Trust, once cracked, began to fall apart completely. The woman sat down, her hands steady. She felt no satisfaction, no joy, only relief. The truth was finally visible. In the days that followed, the county changed quickly. Investigations began. Roles shifted, and sea leaders stepped down quietly. Others lost the influence they had protected for years. Meetings became tense, careful, and public. Through it all, the woman remained calm. People who had once ignored her now sought her advice. Some apologized awkwardly. Others avoided her entirely. She accepted both reactions without comment. It did not need approval. She had never needed it. The rancher watched everything with a mix of awe and gratitude. He realized how close he had come to losing her trust by staying silent before. He made a promise to himself not to repeat that mistake. Their marriage, once built on obligation, now held something stronger. Not romance. Not fantasy.
Respect. At night, they spoke more openly.
About the past. About the future. About what it meant to stand alone and what it meant to stand together. There was still distance, but it no longer felt empty. The county, meanwhile, struggled to adjust. Order had been restored, but not the kind they were used to. This new order demanded accountability. It demanded honesty, and it had been shaped by a woman they had once dismissed entirely. That knowledge sat heavily on them. They had forced a marriage to solve a problem. Instead, they had awakened someone who refused to stay small, and deep down they knew something else too. This was not the end. It was only the moment they realized who she truly was. The county did not return to its old ways. Even after the meetings ended and new rules were put in place, something had shifted too deeply to be undone. People moved more carefully now. Words were chosen with thought. Decisions were questioned. Silence no longer felt safe for those who once hid behind it. And at the center of that change was the woman. She did not seek attention for what she had done. She did not remind anyone of their past words or actions. When people spoke of her, she listened without pride. When they avoided her, she did not chase them. I had learned long ago that true strength did not need to prove itself again and again. The ranch continued to grow. With the county systems now under clearer rules, business became fairer. The rancher found fewer obstacles in his work. Deals were cleaner, agreements honored. For the first time in years, he felt he could plan without worrying about hidden trouble. He also felt different at home. The house no longer felt cold. It was still quiet, but it was a comfortable quiet now. Meals were shared more often. Conversations lasted longer. Sometimes they spoke about work, sometimes about nothing important at all. There were moments of shared laughter, small but real. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sky darken, the rancher finally spoke about something he had avoided for a long time. He thanked her. Not for the records, not for the meetings, not for fixing the county, but for staying, for choosing to stand firm instead of breaking, for turning a situation forced upon her into something meaningful. His voice was steady, but his words carried weight. She listened quietly. When she replied, her words were simple. She said she had done what she believed was right. She said she had learned long ago that waiting for permission often meant waiting forever. And she said that respect, once given honestly, mattered more to her than praise. That night, something settled between them. It was not a dramatic change. There were no promises spoken aloud. But there was understanding. And understanding had been missing from both their lives for too long. The county slowly began to speak of her differently. They no longer used the old label. They referred to her by name. Some spoke of her with admiration, others with caution, a few with regret, but all of them acknowledged her presence. Young women began watching her closely. They noticed how she spoke without anger, how she stood without apology. They saw that power did not always come from loud voices or raised hands. Sometimes it came from patience, preparation, and the courage to speak when it mattered most. The woman noticed them too. She did not give speeches. She did not offer advice unless asked. But when she was asked, she answered honestly. She encouraged them to learn, to observe, and to trust themselves even when others did not. The rancher supported her in quiet ways. He made sure her voice was heard. He stood beside her at gatherings, not as a shield, but as an equal. People saw that clearly now. The idea that she controlled him faded. What replaced it was something harder to challenge. Partnership. I'm past. Seasons changed. The land continued its cycle of work and rest. The county settled into a new rhythm. Problems still existed as they always would, but they were faced openly now. The cost of hiding had become too high. One afternoon, a visitor from a neighboring area arrived to speak with the rancher. He asked questions about how the county had changed so quickly. He wanted to know what had caused it. The rancher did not answer right away. He looked toward the house where his wife stood in the doorway watching the fields. She was calm, steady, exactly as she had been from the beginning. She reminded us to look, he finally said, at what we ignored. The visitor nodded, thoughtful. That evening, the woman walked through the ranch, the same land she had once entered as a stranger. She remembered her first night there, unsure of her place, unsure of her future. She thought of the whispers, the looks, the expectations of failure. She felt no bitterness. Those experiences had shaped her, but they no longer defined her. She had not set out to change the county. She had only wanted to survive with dignity. Everything else had followed naturally from that choice. As the sun dipped below the horizon, she felt a quiet sense of peace. Not because life was perfect. Not because every wound had healed, but because she had been seen. And more importantly, because she had seen herself clearly. The county had forced a marriage, believing it could control outcomes the way it always had. It believed it was correcting a problem, restoring order, protecting tradition. Instead, it had revealed its own weaknesses. And in doing so, it had given space for someone unexpected to rise. Years later, people would still talk about that time. They would argue about who was right and who was wrong, but one thing was never questioned again. Underestimating a quiet person was a mistake, because the woman they once dismissed had not only changed her own life, she had reshaped an entire county simply by refusing to stay silent when the truth mattered most. And that legacy remained long after the whispers faded.